The forest was quiet in the late afternoon, filled with that particular stillness that comes just before evening. Shafts of golden sunlight pierced through the canopy of pine and oak trees, creating patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. The air smelled of earth and moss, of pine needles warmed by the sun, of the wildness that existed far from any town or settlement. Jacob Holloway rode slowly through the timber on his Palomino mare, Honey. At 42 years old, he had the weathered look of a man who had spent most of his life outdoors. His face was deeply tanned, with lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. A scar ran along his jawline, a reminder of an encounter with barbed wire when he was younger. He wore a faded red bandana around his neck, a brown leather vest over a plaid shirt, and jeans that had seen better days. His boots were scuffed and worn, the kind that had walked countless miles across rough terrain. He was checking his boundary lines, as he did every few weeks. The forest marked the eastern edge of his ranch, and beyond it lay land that had once belonged to the Thorne family. That property had been abandoned for decades, ever since some tragedy had driven the family away. The locals didn't talk about it much, but there were stories. Dark stories about curses and disappearances and things that were better left alone. Jacob didn't put much stock in such tales. He was a practical man who dealt with practical problems. Drought, sick cattle, broken fences, bills that needed paying. Those were real. Curses were just stories people told to explain away things they didn't understand. But as Honey picked her way carefully through the underbrush, something made Jacob pause. He pulled gently on the reins, and the mare stopped, her ears swiveling forward attentively. There was something ahead, a shape that didn't belong in the natural pattern of the forest. Jacob urged Honey forward slowly, his hand instinctively moving to rest on the rifle that hung in a scabbard on his saddle. Not that he expected trouble, but a man learned to be cautious in the wilderness. As he drew closer, the shape resolved itself into something that made his heart clench with shock and concern. It was a woman. She was sitting on the forest floor, her back against a fallen log, her arms pulled behind her. Even from a distance, Jacob could see that she was bound. Rope encircled her torso and arms, tying her to the log. Her ankles were also bound together, the rope extending to tie around two small trees on either side, keeping her legs stretched out in front of her. Her dress was once white or cream-colored, but now it was stained with dirt and what looked like dried blood. The fabric was torn in several places. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands around her face, obscuring her features. She appeared to be unconscious or asleep, her head tilted forward, chin resting on her chest. Jacob's first thought was that he had stumbled upon a crime scene. His second thought was that whoever had done this might still be nearby. He dismounted quickly but quietly, leaving Honey ground tied. He approached cautiously, his eyes scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of movement or danger. But there was nothing, just the woman, the trees, and the fading afternoon light. When he was a few feet away, he spoke softly, not wanting to startle her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The woman's head lifted slowly. Her face was smudged with dirt, but her eyes, a striking green that seemed to glow even in the shadowed forest, locked onto his with an intensity that was almost frightening. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "Please, untie me, I beg you." Then, to Jacob's dismay, tears began streaming down her face. Her whole body shook with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside, the kind of crying that spoke of prolonged suffering and desperation. "Please," she sobbed again. "Please don't leave me here. I beg you, please." Jacob felt something twist in his chest. He had seen suffering before, in animals caught in traps, in cattle dying from disease, in neighbors who had lost everything to drought or fire. But there was something about this woman's tears, about the raw desperation in her voice, that affected him deeply. He quickly knelt beside her, his hands already reaching for the ropes. "It's okay," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "I'm going to help you. You're going to be okay. My name is Jacob. I'm a rancher. I'm not going to hurt you." The woman continued to sob, her whole body trembling. "Please," she kept repeating. "Please, please, please." Jacob examined the ropes. They were old but strong, tied with complex knots that he didn't recognize. Whoever had done this had known what they were doing. The ropes were tight enough to restrain but not so tight as to cut off circulation completely. Still, he could see red marks on her wrists and ankles where the rope had rubbed against her skin. He pulled out his pocket knife and opened it. The blade was sharp. He kept it that way, and he began sawing carefully at the rope around her torso. As he worked, he continued talking, hoping his voice would provide some comfort. "How long have you been out here?" he asked gently. The woman's sobbing had subsided into quiet weeping, but she didn't answer his question. Instead, she said something that made no sense to him. "You shouldn't," she whispered. "You don't know what you're doing. You don't understand." Jacob paused in his cutting. "Ma'am, I understand that someone has tied you up in the middle of the forest, and that's not right. I'm going to get you free and take you somewhere safe." "But the curse," she said, her voice still weak but urgent. "You're breaking the binding. You don't know what will happen." Jacob resumed cutting. He had dealt with people in shock before. They often said things that didn't make sense. The important thing was to get her free and get her medical attention. The rope around her torso finally parted. He moved to the ropes binding her wrists behind her back. These were even tighter, and he had to work carefully to avoid cutting her skin. "Almost there," he murmured. "Just hold on." When the rope around her wrists finally gave way, the woman's arms fell forward limply. She cried out softly, and Jacob realized that her arms had probably been in that position for hours, maybe longer. The sudden change would be painful as blood flow returned to normal. He quickly shrugged out of his leather vest and draped it over her shoulders, helping to cover the torn parts of her dress. It was a small gesture, but he wanted to preserve her dignity as much as possible. "Can you move your arms?" he asked. She tried, but her movements were slow and weak. He could see her wincing with pain. "It's okay," he said. "Take your time. Your circulation needs to return." He moved down to cut the ropes around her ankles. These came away more easily, and soon she was completely free. But freedom seemed to bring no relief. Instead, the woman's weeping intensified. "You've done it," she sobbed. "You've broken the binding." After all this time, someone finally broke it. Jacob sat back on his heels, studying her with concern. "Ma'am, I think you might be in shock. Let me get you some water." He stood and went back to Honey, retrieving his canteen. When he returned, he knelt beside the woman again and held the canteen to her lips. "Drink slowly," he instructed. She drank greedily at first, then more slowly as he pulled the canteen back. Slightly, water ran down her chin, but she didn't seem to care. When she had drunk enough, Jacob capped the canteen and set it aside. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He reached out and gently brushed some of the tangled hair away from her face. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked softly. The woman looked at him with those striking green eyes, and for the first time, he saw something other than fear and desperation in them. He saw recognition, understanding, and something that might have been gratitude. "Sarah," she whispered. "My name is Sarah Thorne." Thorne, the name of the family that had once owned the abandoned property. "Sarah," Jacob repeated. "That's a good name. Now, Sarah, can you tell me who did this to you?" Sarah's expression changed. The fear returned, but it was mixed with something else. Something darker. "My grandfather," she said. 70 years ago. Jacob blinked. 70 years. That was impossible. This woman looked no older than 30 at most. "Sarah," he said gently, "I think you're confused. Maybe you hit your head. Let me help you up, and we'll get you to a doctor." He stood and reached down to help her. She took his hands, and he pulled her carefully to her feet. But her legs wouldn't hold her. She collapsed forward, and Jacob caught her, supporting her weight against him. She was lighter than he expected, almost fragile in his arms. "I've got you," he said. "I've got you." Sarah's hands clutched at his shirt, and she buried her face against his shoulder, her body shaking with renewed sobs. "Thank you," she whispered between sobs. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. I thought no one would ever come. I thought I would be here forever." Jacob held her, one hand supporting her back, the other gently cradling her head. He felt her tears soaking through his shirt, felt the trembling in her body, and something in him responded to her vulnerability and pain. "You're safe now," he murmured. "I promise you're safe." They stood like that for several long moments, Jacob supporting her weight, Sarah clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to chaos. Finally, Her sobbing began to subside. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him. "I need to explain," she said, her voice still shaky but more controlled. "You need to understand what you've done. Right now, I need to get you somewhere warm and safe," Jacob replied. "Explanations can wait," but Sarah shook her head. "No, you don't understand. This place, this forest, it's not natural. There's a curse here. My grandfather made a deal with something dark, something evil. He needed to save his land, and he was willing to pay any price. The price was me." Jacob wanted to dismiss her words as the ramblings of someone traumatized and confused. But there was something in her eyes, something in the way she spoke, that gave him pause. "What kind of curse?" he found himself asking. "A binding," Sarah explained. "One life, bound to the land, feeding it with their essence. My grandfather chose me. He brought me here, tied me to that log, and performed a ritual. I've been here ever since. Conscious but unable to move, unable to die, unable to do anything but exist. For 70 years, Jacob's tone was skeptical. For 70 years, Sarah confirmed. Watching the seasons change, watching the forest grow and die and grow again. Alone, always alone. Jacob looked around the forest. It did have an odd quality to it. The trees here seemed older, more twisted than they should be. The light fell strangely, and there was a feeling in the air, something he couldn't quite name but that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "If what you're saying is true," Jacob said slowly, "then what happens now that you're free?" Sarah's expression was complex, hope mixed with fear, relief mixed with uncertainty. "I don't know," she admitted. "The curse was supposed to last forever. But you broke the binding. You freed me with pure intentions, without knowing what you were doing. Maybe that's enough to break it completely. Or maybe," she trailed off, looking worried. "Maybe what?" Jacob prompted. "Maybe it will need something more," Sarah finished quietly. "The curse runs deep. It's in the land itself, in the roots of the trees, in the water that flows underground. Breaking my physical bonds might not be enough." Jacob considered this. Part of him still wanted to believe this was all just shock-induced delusion. But another part, the part that had spent his whole life on the land, that understood the ways nature could be both beautiful and terrible, was willing to at least consider the possibility. "Well," he said finally, "whatever the truth is, we can figure it out. But first, let's get you out of this forest. Can you walk?" Sarah tested her legs. They were weak, but they held her weight. "I think so," she said. "If you help me." Jacob put his arm around her waist, supporting her. She leaned into him, and together they made their slow way back to where Honey waited patiently. When they reached the mare, Jacob faced a problem. Sarah was in no condition to ride alone, but if he put her in the saddle by herself, she might fall off. The only solution was for them to ride together. "I'm going to lift you up into the saddle," Jacob explained. "Then I'll get up behind you. Is that okay?" Sarah nodded. Jacob placed his hands on her waist. Despite everything she had been through, despite the dirt and tears, he was struck by how she felt, real and solid and alive. He lifted her easily, helping her settle into the saddle. Then he swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. She leaned back against him, and he could feel her exhaustion, her body finally beginning to relax now that she was free and safe. "Hold on," he said softly. He clicked his tongue, and Honey began walking, carrying them both out of the dark forest and into the fading afternoon light. As they rode, Sarah spoke quietly, telling him more about the curse, about her grandfather's desperation, about the 70 years she had spent bound and alone. Jacob listened, no longer questioning or doubting, simply accepting her story. The sun was setting by the time they reached the edge of the forest. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple, beautiful in the way only a western sunset could be. Sarah gasped when she saw it. "I'd forgotten," she whispered. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it could be." Jacob understood. For 70 years, she had only seen the forest around her, trapped in one place, unable to look away. The simple act of seeing a sunset must be overwhelming. They crossed onto Jacob's ranch land. The grass here was brown from drought, but it was still his land, still home. The ranch house stood in the distance, a simple structure but solid and welcoming. "Is that where we're going?" Sarah asked. "Yes," Jacob confirmed. It's not much, but it's warm and safe. You can rest there, clean up, get some proper food and water. And then we'll figure out what to do next. Why are you helping me? Sarah asked suddenly. You don't know me. For all you know, I could be dangerous. Jacob was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Why was he helping her? It would have been easy to just call the authorities, to let someone else deal with this strange situation. But something had compelled him to cut those ropes, to offer his vest, to take her home. Because it was the right thing to do, he said finally. Because you were suffering, and I had the power to stop that suffering. That's reason enough. Sarah was silent for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, thank you, Jacob Holloway. Thank you for seeing me as a person worth helping. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, two strangers brought together by impossible circumstances, moving toward an uncertain future but united in the simple human connection of compassion given and gratefully received. When they reached the ranch house, Jacob helped Sarah down from the saddle. She stood on shaky legs, looking at the simple wooden structure like it was a palace. Come on, Jacob said gently. Let's get you inside. He led her up the porch steps and through the front door. The house was modest. A living room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, a couple of bedrooms. But it was clean and warm, and after 70 years in the forest, it must have seemed like heaven. Jacob guided Sarah to the couch and helped her sit down. Then he went to the kitchen and returned with a glass of water and some bread and cheese, simple food, but nourishing. Sarah ate slowly, savoring each bite like it was the finest meal she had ever tasted. And perhaps, in a way, it was. The first meal eaten as a free woman in 70 years. Jacob built a fire in the fireplace, more for comfort than warmth, though the evening was growing cool. The flames cast a golden glow through the room, creating shadows that danced on the walls. When Sarah had finished eating, she looked at Jacob with those remarkable green eyes. What happens now? She asked. Jacob settled into a chair across from her. Now you rest, he said. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the details. If this curse is real, and I'm starting to believe it might be, then we'll find a way to deal with it. Together, Sarah repeated softly, as if testing the word. I haven't had a together in 70 years. Well, you have one now, Jacob assured her. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn. Outside, night had fallen completely, and the stars were beginning to appear in the vast Montana sky. Sarah's eyes were growing heavy. The warmth of the fire, the food in her belly, the safety of the house, it was all combining to make her feel truly relaxed for the first time in decades. Jacob, she said sleepily, yes, you're a good man. The world needs more people like you. Jacob felt something warm spread through his chest at her words. I'm just doing what anyone should do. But most wouldn't, Sarah observed. Most would have ridden past, or called the authorities and let them deal with it. You actually stopped. You actually cared. That matters. Her eyes closed, and within moments, she was asleep. Jacob sat watching her for a while, this mysterious woman who claimed to have been cursed for 70 years, who had suffered more than he could imagine, and who had still managed to retain her humanity and grace. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if the curse was truly broken or if there were more challenges ahead. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had done the right thing. And sometimes, that was enough. The fire crackled softly, the wind whispered around the house. And two people, one who had been alone too long, and one who hadn't realized how lonely he was, found unexpected companionship in the quiet Montana night. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and questions. But tonight, there was peace. There was safety. There was hope. And there was the simple, profound truth that one act of compassion could change everything. Jacob stood quietly and fetched a blanket, draping it gently over Sarah's sleeping form. Then he settled back into his chair, content to keep watch while she rested. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly across the sky. Inside, the fire burned low. And in the space between waking and sleeping, between past and future, between curse and freedom, two souls found what they had been searching for. Not just rescue, not just survival, but redemption, and the promise of better days ahead.